Good afternoon. This is Rebecca Martin at NASH. I'm very pleased to welcome you to the next in our ongoing series of webinars in this period of transition, I guess, and transformation in higher education. Today, we're going to talk about taking our PK-12 partnerships to the next level, recognizing that the work that we do is part of a continuum and we really cannot make good decisions about what we're going to do, for example, in the fall, until we get a clear sense of what K-12 is going to do. And I'm sure Nancy and her colleagues are going to shed a lot of light on that for us today, with at least whatever's in their crystal balls. So let me move into that quickly to the next slide, Chrissy. As usual, we are partnering with the System Center at the University at Albany with Jason Lane, who is the director of the center, but today will put his other hat on, which is Dean of the School of Education at the University of Albany. He'll be on the panel. Nancy Zimford, the founding director of the System Center, will be moderating. And then we have support from Maria Kahn and David Epstein-Halevi. So today our panelists are, as I already mentioned, Jason Lane, Nicole Prescott from the University of Texas System, and Nancy Shapiro from the University System of Maryland. And I think that Nicole is experiencing some problems with technical problems today, so we won't see her video, but we certainly will be hearing from her. So with that, let me turn it over to you, Nancy.
Great, thank you, Rebecca, and thanks everybody for joining. I will tell you that the panel convenes a few minutes ahead of you just to sort of get our heads together, and we just couldn't quit talking. There are so many issues. I mean, obviously, we're a huge credentialing organization. We prepare the teachers for thousands of our K-12 schools. They are the teachers who teach the students who are our pipeline. And even with changing demographics, there are still students who are not making it from high school to college. So there's plenty of work to be done there. Now we are joined at the hip because we're learning quickly how to be somewhat universal in our remote instruction. I know we'll talk about that. And then I think to bring it all together, you've heard it said so many times how COVID-19 has exposed our racial and cultural gaps in this country. I think as educators, we are not surprised. We knew that. We work in urban and rural schools and we see the impact of systemic racism, of poverty, of one zip code, if you will. So we're going to talk about all of that, but because we want to give our presenters, our panelists, a little chance to set the table, if you will, and lay the groundwork, we're going to hear from Jason and Nicole and Nancy, some opening comments, and then we had a prep session because we just wanted to get a lot of things on the table. So we have a list of topics we hope we'll get time to cover. And of course, through the chat box, the chat room, you can give us a question and we'll try to answer those as well. So Jason, in alphabetical order, I guess, we're gonna begin with you. Jason has just become the permanent dean of the School of Education at UAlbany, and he and I spent quite a bit of time together at SUNY Systems, so he has both perspectives, as do Nicole and Nancy. So Jason, you're on.
Great, thanks Nancy, and welcome everybody. Glad to be here with you today. I think in many ways, opening marks are continuing to evolve in the same way our plans do. So much has happened even in the past weekend regarding our federal statements around what schools should or should not be doing. And here in New York, we're continuing to wait to see exactly what the plans are going to be. Though our state education department provided some new guidance today on those options. What I would say is, as we think about this from a systems perspective, and then I'll talk a little bit from Dean of Ed. There's so much ambiguity right now out in the field that it's been helpful to be part of a system of higher education. And here in SUNY, we've had a long-standing group of deans of education that meet quite regularly and talk through a variety of issues, how we're grappling with things, what are the challenges that are happening with regulation in the state. That group has been incredibly useful in terms of figuring out how we're moving forward collectively as a system. in navigating COVID-19. And that's ranging everything from, how do we think about what's happening with regulations in the state education department that's impacting certification, to how we're navigating the partnerships with our K-12 partners as we think about the preparation of teachers and getting our student teachers into classrooms. And we have a direct conduit with somebody similar to Nancy and Nicole, in our case, that sits at SUNY and has been regular conversations with us and helping us work with the state education department to navigate a lot of this, the changing regulations and the rules that are happening. And so I just shout out to systemness, big fan of it. So to sort of say, being able to work collectively as a group has been much more empowering than being a single dean sitting on a campus trying to figure out what the heck the state's doing, right? And so I think that's been incredibly helpful. For us, just sort of to put that dean hat on for a moment, we are a school of education that is very heavily involved already in online education. We've been rated top 10 in the country for online provision of graduate education for a number of years. We have a master's degree in online education, actually teach teachers how to teach online. So when this crisis hit, it was something that we came to quite naturally because we were prepared for it because of our background. And a couple of things we did to be able to partner with K-12 is we created a new website called remoteed.org, which is a clearinghouse of online and electronic resources that are being thrown at teachers that are vetted by our faculty and staff to help them navigate this. And it's organized by level, grade level, and subject matter, so they can more easily sort of see what resources might be available to them. Because what we were hearing from our teacher colleagues was there was just this onslaught of resources being thrown at them, and they had no idea how to actually vet them as they were trying to move remote. And so we were trying to help them navigate that using our experience. And then we started convening sort of ad hocly at first and now formalized these conversations called community conversations, bringing together K-12 faculty and our faculty to talk about the issues that are happening in the remote environment, and has been incredibly powerful to have those dialogues occurring as we sort of collectively navigate this space and learn from each other and bring our collective expertise to it. And what has been great then is we have shared that with other deans in SUNY and other deans in other systems as a resource to help other student candidates move forward. To think about this, we had a particular set of expertise here that others could tap into and use, but it made me think about the way we can sort of more collaboratively work together through all of this as we help each other navigate this space. So I will stop there and let others pick it up from the more system perspective.
I had one question, Jason. I was wondering about that conversation between K-12 and university faculty. Are you thinking you'll formalize that, or has anybody suggested?
Yes, I think we will continue these weekly conversations. They've grown in interest. We get people from all over the state and the nation actually coming together because there's a lot of co-learning happening as we're navigating this space. And what is, in the past session we had, which was fun, is we brought our Dean of Public Health in, who's a real expert on COVID-19, along with the Chief Operating Officer of our local BOCES, which is sort of a super district here in New York, to collectively talk about the public health issues and what does it mean to reopen, and how do you not just frame it from the education standpoint, which is what we often think about, but here's a public health expert who is sort of saying, here's how we need to think about it from the public health standpoint. So it's powerful, I think, to pair the collective resources of the university with K-12. And my hope is long-term, these conversations will influence how we think about our own curriculum and how we're training the next generation of teachers, because frankly, this is not going to go away. What we're hearing now from superintendents is they want to hire people who have experience in remote learning. And so we've got to figure out ways, I think, to transform our curriculum now so that we're preparing teachers not just for tomorrow, but I think for what's going to be happening years ahead in K-12. And regulations are not going to be keeping up with it.
Well, we're going to move to Texas. I just want to comment that Randy Weingarten, the president of the AFT, has a lot of interest in New York. In fact, I think resides in New York. The New York City Teachers Union is very, very vocal, along with the statewide. So we're going to come back to, I think, to how the professional organizations factor into how we do our work. In the meantime, Nicole Prescott, I'm thrilled to see your face. You figured it out. And bring us news from Texas.
All righty. Yes, I've got several different computers now all over my desk. So hopefully I stay focused on the right one. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nicole Prescott. I'm the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs, focusing on P20 initiatives at the University of Texas System. And I'd like to take these few minutes to ground our conversation today with a little bit of context of where UT System's coming from, give you a little idea about Texas. I believe that we are in the midst of a paradigmatic shift, both due to the impact of COVID and the fight for racial equity and justice. Ed prep programs are frequently having to prove their worth to the universities and to the world. We know this. Enrollment in our programs is down, and the prestige of the teaching profession has been continually attacked. But countering that negative stereotypes about the teaching profession, our teacher graduates have proven to be agile in pivoting to remote teaching and to online learning, and our ed prep faculty have generously shared their expertise with K-12 partners, transforming those partnerships for the better in ways we've never partnered before. And if COVID has shown us anything, and I believe that it has shown us many, many things, it has shown us the importance of teachers and of teacher preparation. In an age of increased cultural separation and racial inequity, I believe educators are essential leaders in changing the course of our society. I think it's worth taking stock of our role in these paradigmatic changes and think about how we might reframe that narrative. We have a prime moment to do so right now. And there are a lot of challenges associated with K-12 education this year. One, of course, is the digital divide, and that's a big one. We also have students who are not only experiencing summer melt, but also in many cases a spring melt. Our most vulnerable students, those with learning challenges, our English language learners, our students from economically disadvantaged backgrounds, they're the ones who are going to suffer the most through all of this. And we need to make sure that we are providing even better support so they have the most opportunities possible to succeed. And in many, I believe our strongest collaborators are going to be our students. And in many cases, I think also the parents. And I believe those two collaborations are going to be critical. And I think students are going to find themselves very empowered in this new way. And of course, our colleges of education need to be seamless collaborators with our districts and vice versa. And kind of some final words, our veteran teachers have been really heroic. With little preparation, these teachers had to reinvent their teaching processes overnight to allow for the continuity of learning for our students. Now they're going to be entering a school year that is fraught with uncertainty, political tension, and serious health and safety issues. They're being asked to prepare and teach online and in-person lessons, asked to ensure students keep their masks on and socially distance. And I have two 12-year-olds, and I know that that's not easy even at my house if necessary. And they're doing this all the while having to ensure that students are mastering the learning objectives that they are going to be assessed on in their state mandated tests later this year. They need us. And our new to profession teachers heading into their first year of teaching, they're going to have an unprecedented experience. But they may have fewer mindset barriers to virtual or blended learning. Because many of them have experienced that already as undergrads. That said, I do think that we need to implement robust and long-term teacher mentoring and closely coordinated induction programs for our new teachers. They need us. So UT System is partnering with our institutions and other systems like TAMU's system. I see you on here, Shonda, hello. One of our favorite partners. As well as other institutions around Texas to address all of these challenges. Our colleges of education are working in close, deep partnership with districts in ways we've never partnered before in order to better support Texas teachers and Texas students. So just to kind of end this off, we're in a moment of change, and I believe we need to capitalize on this moment and begin to set a new course on what education means, how it's facilitated, how it's funded, and what all of that means for educator preparation now and into the future.
So, Nicole, before I let you go, would you give me 2 or 3 ways in which we could recognize seamless collaboration? Because it's a great banner statement, but do you mean some kind of regulatory relationship?
Well, I hate to put anything in a regulation because it usually comes around to bite us in the rear end. I think it's already happening. You know, before, when I found I was going to be speaking with you all on this webinar, we had we've been having some statewide ed deans meetings through Zoom. And I asked folks, how are their partnerships changing, or are they? And because of COVID. And what I heard was that the partnerships are becoming much deeper, much more open and transparent and more trusting, that there is a lot more frequent communication, that they're seeing a lot less red tape between
maybe codependency.
Yes, there's definitely an interdependency, right? And what I'm finding too is that because of that, it's not only us helping K-12, but the K-12 folks are helping us to have a new perspective on our priorities and what we need to be doing in our own curricula.
Yeah, well, that's helpful. I think making it concrete is sort of what we're working toward. Thanks so much, Nicole. Hi, Nancy Shapiro from Maryland. Please continue.
Thank you. So I can't agree more with both Jason and Nicole. I think that they framed it beautifully. Jason, sort of the policy challenges, Nicole, the passion of the moment that we're desperately wanting to see this as an opportunity and not just a huge challenge. I am the Associate Vice Chancellor for Education and Outreach in the Office of Academic Affairs at the University System of Maryland. I taught high school English. I directed freshman writing at the University of Maryland, so I know how students come into the pipeline and what kinds of things from the, on the ground that we expect them, what college readiness means. At the university system, our P20 office has a motto. The motto is, students can't learn what they haven't been taught, and teachers can't teach what they haven't learned. And the connection between schools and teachers is, is essential. What I do at the system is a lot like what Jason described and Nicole described. I convene the deans of education, but I don't just convene the system deans. I convene all the deans in the state, the private deans, Johns Hopkins, Goucher, Loyola, all of the private universities are sort of partners with us in our meetings. And I also convene the community colleges that are our partners in the teacher preparation pipeline. We have an Associate of Arts of Teaching, which is a formalized degree. So the community colleges sort of feed right into our teacher prep programs. And the reason I mention that is that as we think about the challenges that we're facing, the COVID challenges, the professionalization of teaching challenges, the enrollment issues, we've taught, the other two have mentioned the partnerships with the K-12 schools, and I have a lot to say about that as well. But I want to recognize our important partnerships with community colleges, especially for the systems that don't include community colleges, because it seems to me that we're going to be even more dependent on the community colleges as pathways into teaching than we've ever been before, if only because a lot of our students are going to find it easier to go to local universities and local college experiences, at least during the COVID emergency. And if they start there, we're going to want to bring them into the 4 years. So I think that that's something we're thinking about in terms of pipeline. I do want to mention some of the context in Maryland. You know, it's like everything else, it's complicated. We have a governor, a Republican governor, who has just today or yesterday said that in spite of what Secretary DeVos has been preaching about starting schools, he says, we're not going to be rushed. We're not going to be rushed. And he's a Republican. So it's sort of interesting in the terms of the politics that we have somebody who understands that there are constraints around what people want and what people can get. We also have, and I think part of the sensitivity to the education issues in Maryland stem from a 2-year commission that we've had sort of delving into the issues of education reform. It's called the Commission on Innovation and Excellence in Education, and it was chaired by Britt Kerwin, who was the former chancellor of the University System of Maryland, which is important for 2 reasons. One, he is one of the icons of higher ed in the country. And so for him to chair an education reform initiative in the state of Maryland that is focused on increasing funding at a significant level. We're recommending over $4 billion in a Maryland state budget that is not all that big. So an increase in funding for K-12 schools, that carries a lot of weight. And over the 2 years, what happened in the Kerwin Commission was that it was an education of the entire population of the state about what's important about education. Because everybody in the state is going to have to buy into this set of reform initiatives in order to pay for it. It's all kind of come from taxes. So I think that facing the COVID emergency, we have a comparatively educated public. And in that respect, Nicole's comments are really important. If we can use this moment as, you know, a paradigm shift, as a sense that we are in this together for the future of our state, of our children, of our country, I think we can bring people around to some really important commitments. And obviously some of those commitments, you know, have to start with equity issues, which also brings me back to the community college pipeline, because that's where we get many teacher candidates who don't look like the current teacher population. And so if we want to encourage more diversity in our teacher candidates, we want to sort of spread the wealth of what our programs are doing, then I think it doesn't hurt to think more broadly about what the higher education community, you know, how to define the higher education community. So I will just sort of end by saying I think that if our challenge is meeting the current upside down world of education, we can't do better than collaborate with our public schools and our community colleges and our 4-year teacher programs to sort of put the pieces together and say, this is, you know, we know what we're doing and we're going to sort of move it forward. So I will just stop there and let's talk about it.
Well, the three of you put some great issues on the table. I just want to stick with the equity issue a minute, Nancy, because we have not seen huge increases in the number of Black and Hispanic teachers and other representations of diversity, even though we dream of a better order. Does Maryland have an angle on how to increase that pipeline?
Our angle is our Associate of Arts of Teaching. We're getting many more students of color, you know, Black and brown teachers coming into the pipeline through the community colleges, which makes sense because the community colleges are local. We want to encourage teachers from their communities to stay in their communities. So that pipeline has been, you know, I won't call it an ace in the hole. We don't have that number, those set of numbers, but that's where we're seeing a lot. But the other thing I would say is that the Kerwin Commission spent a lot of time thinking about the profession at large and how hard it is to recruit anybody into teaching. Why would people who have choices go into education. It is, as Nicole said, it's such a hard sell in terms of a profession. To the extent that we get to talk about the Kerwin Commission recommended career ladders, rewarding people not just for moving into administration, but for becoming mentors and master teachers on different kinds of pathways through the profession than we've had before. This isn't a new conversation, but for Maryland, it became very concrete in the recommendations of the Kerwin Commission. And obviously, everything's all upside down with COVID, but I think that if we stick with the commitment and the alternative ways to get people into the profession, we'll be doing important work.
Indeed, indeed. I want to do a lightning round on one question, which is changes in credentialing for the moment that were emergency in nature, and if any of those changes in the credentialing process in your state will stick. So Jason, did you get a little edge from, we call it SED in New York? And then I want to know, Nicole and Nancy, if you had a credentialing breakthrough. So I'll start with you, Jason. You're on mute.
Rookie mistake. We got a little bit of leeway, both in terms of what is expected of student teachers in completing their placements, and in terms of an emergency credential that has been issued that student candidates can apply for to be able to go into the classroom without having to take all of the credentialing exams that need to be traditionally completed. We are hoping that those reprieves will be extended into the fall, but we know pretty clear that we're not going to see a major change in regulation in New York State when it comes to credentialing quite yet. Even with emergency credential, there's still an expectation that the students are going to get their full credential within a matter of months to a year after that, and they have to meet all the appropriate regulations. So there's some emergency regs in place, but they're not. I don't think they're going to stick.
Yeah,
At least as
just
it's right now.
a little crack in the door. What about Nicole? Texas brought the credential back, right?
Well, we brought back the education degree. We always had the educator certification, but you had to have an academic degree, not an education degree. And we did bring that back, and I'm happy to chat with y'all more about that. But basically, the situation in Texas is very similar to the situation in New York. There was a lot of waivers put in place due to the national or the state of disaster declaration by the governor. A lot of rules were waived. And I think the majority of all of that will hopefully go on into the fall. I do think that there might be some changes in rule to our education code regarding, or at least the administrative code regarding, for example, how we define what a school day is. Prior to that, it was, a thought to be like an 8-hour day where you're in person with students. And because of this, now we've had to say that whatever a district deems is their school day will equal what a student teacher, for example, has to go through. If it's a 4-hour school day, then it's a 4-hour school day for them in terms of their clinical field work. So,
well, and the question we all need to answer is, what will the clinical experience look like? Say we stay remote through December or longer. Nancy, I know you're dealing with that too. And tell me if there were any regulatory waivers while you're at it.
Yep. Well, yes, there were regulatory emergency waivers very much based on what New York did. I mean, our education deans community sent a lot of examples over to the State Department for them to consider, because it was a long time, a big distance between sip and lip, between cup and lip kind of thing. We had the emergency where we couldn't, our candidates were shut out of the schools, and we didn't know whether or not they would ever finish their hours, and we eventually got waivers. And yes, and we not to keep beating this horse, but we gave the community colleges an automatic waiver because the completion of the AAT requires passing praxis. And we completely just said, if the community colleges certify that their teachers finished that AAT program, they didn't have to take the test because the test wasn't available. So we gave sort of blanket waivers all the way down the line. That being said, the experiences of those interns is not the same as it would have been if the semester had completed. Everyone knows that. So what was really interesting, and I'm sure this happened across the country, is that there were many teacher candidates who were much more facile with getting up on the platforms, the internet platforms, whether it's Zoom or Google Groups or whatever. They were much more facile than the teachers in the classes. So the collaboration was more two-way than sort of mentoring in both directions, which was a different kind of a thing. And just a brief personal story. I have twin grandsons who are 10. They are in two separate classes in the same school, and they're both at home working on two computers because they were at home. And my grandson that had the 27-year-old teacher, their assignments were up in a minute. He was able to do his work in the morning, get it done, and he'd go out to play. And Jacob, whose teacher was 45, she couldn't get her assignments up. They wouldn't load. He was waiting, Mommy, when am I going to get my assignment so I could go outside? It was a very interesting dynamic. And so I think that the experiences of our interns is going to be quite different during this period of time.
Well, and this is probably true of our college students in general, teaching our faculty, but it's kind of ironic. And, the difficulty of COVID has been that when interns, and I'll say doctors as well, they were frozen out of the hospitals for security purposes and because of liabilities. But in fact, this is exactly the crisis they needed to be a part of. And the same with our clinical experiences for our students and for our faculty. So out of all this, if we could in some ways systematize those relationships so that they're more bilateral, maybe would be the word. So I'm intrigued by the fact that all three of you as systems used your convening power. And I wonder also, given these statewide reforms like the Kerwin report, my SUNY colleagues know that now 4 or 5 years ago, we did Teach New York, which was a comprehensive reform proposal. But in what ways can you speculate, because you are systems, you could capitalize on that convening power to introduce changes in statewide policy? What would that require in New York and Maryland and Texas to begin to introduce some of the changes in regulation that were helpful, or even as you talk about induction needing to have more attention? What will these convenings do to move policy? And is that a role system can play? Are you thinking about it that way? And while you're pausing to think, we want to open the floor now to anybody who's got a question. We encourage you to use the chat, and Rebecca's checking our work to make sure we catch your questions or your comments. We'd love to hear from you as well. So my question on the table is the convening power of systems to support some kinds of reform.
I can jump in, and we were talking about the emergency regulations. It occurred to me the contrast of other areas versus education when it came to regulatory reform that was happening, and it sort of further highlighted how I think political education can be in New York State, and I'm sure elsewhere, that we have other fields, professional fields, where they quickly navigated to a alternative way of meeting the professional requirements. So we have mental health programs in our college of education. They basically said, just send us a plan and we'll say it's okay. Education reform took weeks longer than any other profession. It was a much more scrutinized effort in New York State to even to come to some sense of what the regulation and reform was going to be. Almost up until the end of the semester, right? So we really knew what all the regulations were going to be in terms of what the emergency were. Whereas if you were a social worker or if you were a counseling psychologist, this was figured out months before education. And in part, it was because of the politics around education. And so to answer your question, Nancy, I'm not sure how much we can do or not in New York. around that because of so many varied interests in education beyond schools of education in this space. But I will say, I think where we might be able to, I hope we can be headway in a couple of areas. One is the need to change regulations so that we can better prepare teacher candidates for the future. Thinking both about remote learning as well as Black Lives Matters and social justice and all the other issues that are happening around us today. The other is, and I think a critical one, is better discussing the partnership between K-12 and higher ed in the preparation of teachers. There's a shared responsibility there that I would say has really not been solely viewed as shared in this environment. There have been some great school districts that have said, yeah, we're on board, let's figure this out together. And there are others that have basically said, don't talk to me until 2021. I have too many other things to do. We can't be bothered with dealing with all these student teachers. And we've been having this conversation for a number of years already, but I think we really need to sort of get to a place where there is a better regulation around who's responsible for preparing the next generation of teachers. It can't just be colleges of education. It has to be both K-12 and higher ed in this together, and both having a responsibility so that we're not just begging on any teacher's door that is willing to take our student candidates, but we're collectively moving forward in a residency experience that's really preparing students to be teachers of tomorrow.
So I couldn't agree more with Jason, not surprisingly. The Maryland regulatory environment is equally challenging, equally political. The role of the convening of the education deans is only as good as how much they're being listened to. And one of the things that, so one of the advantages of having the Legislative Commission on Education convened, it really was a place where we could bring State Department education policymakers together with the higher ed community, together with the practitioners, the teacher unions and the teachers leaders, and have sort of an open forum conversation. One of the challenges I think in all states is that the districts, depending on how top down any education department, state department is, in our state, it's not a top down department. We have 24 state districts, and each district has very much local control. So what Jason was describing, some of them are open to bringing our interns in, some of them say, I don't have time to think about this. That we need to open that up in a way that, so it's not just the education deans that get convened, it's also the local superintendents, get convened, and that somewhere along the line, we bring both of those groups together. This to me is really one of the challenges for changing policy, because unless both the K-12 schools and the higher ed schools of education can see the advantages of the shared responsibility, they're always going to be somewhere in conflict. The one thing I would say that Maryland has that is a possible key to unlocking this is our Maryland longitudinal data system. Because if we ask the right questions and we get the answers, where are the teachers coming from? Where are they going? How long are they staying? If we can start working with data to make our policies and our decisions, then I think we're going to be in a much better situation.
I want to come back to that very important point about data and how it would help us with our partnerships. Nicole, I'm going to paint outside the lines here and say, as a longtime teacher educator, I've always felt that ed schools were downtrodden, that they always wanted to get the university's attention, that teaching teachers, preparing teachers is an all university responsibility. Well, there you are in the system office, and you probably, I'm guessing, would like for the preparation of teachers to be an all system responsibility. In your dream world, what is it that a system could do to patch up these relationships, to solidify the kinds of partnerships that Nancy and Jason were talking about, because you are a system? Do you have some leverage there that could be put to use?
That is a great question. You know, I feel like the University of Texas, or Texas in general, is a little different from Maryland and New York, in part because we're very decentralized. Our system offices are not, we don't have as much systemness as you all might have, for example. So anything that we do has to be initiated by our institutions. And I come from a collective impact background, and so I tend to take my role as system in very much of a collective impact sort of way. I play the role of an intermediary in many ways. I convene all of our deans of the colleges of education. I get them together. We talk about what our challenges are. We look at data. When I came on board, we were not collecting any system-wide data on our colleges of ed at all. We're barely now starting to get some really nice data dashboards in place to really understand what's happening. And then, you know, recently we've done some strategic planning and figuring out, you know, what we recently went through getting the education degree, and we worked with all the deans across the state. That was an ad hoc policy you know, pursuit that was hugely transformative, and we could not have done it without our other university system partners. But beyond that, in addition to that, we had to figure out, what do we want to do? Where do we want to accomplish? What do we see are the big challenges in the state if we're looking at the education pipeline holistically? And then where can we come in and target to try to address those challenges within the pipeline? And not all of our institutions are going to be addressing every part of that pipeline, but we did settle on 3 big areas, and we're now working to try to address those in a very intentional, systemic sort of way.
Okay.
That's kind of how we're having to make change. But I do want to say one thing. You know, with our experience of getting the education degree reinstated, that was largely about us all working together and convening and deciding this was the biggest obstacle in our pathway. And then it was about educating lawmakers. Our legislature only meets every 2 years. And what we found is they were passing a lot of laws about educator preparation, and they had no clue what educator preparation looked like, what it consisted of, what the curriculum was, nothing. And so we really took it upon ourselves to begin an effort to really educate lawmakers at every turn, because no one wants to pass a bad law to hurt teachers. I would hope not.
Well, we could learn a lot from that experience for sure, Nicole. Rebecca, do you have a question?
I don't have a question. I just wanted to say that Barbara Bales from the University of Wisconsin system has a perspective on this shift in regulations, and I wondered if she might speak to that.
Barbara?
Hi, everybody. I'm Barbara Bales. I'm with the University of Wisconsin System Administration, and our monthly meet with the UW system deans, as well as our Wisconsin Association of Teacher Educators colleges, and they have a bifurcated view of these changes in licensing. One is that they're afraid it's going to open up for a lot of alternative providers. And we have already in place in-district preparation programs going on, where districts are getting the people certified, and then they go into the classroom with or without an extensive clinical experience, or a dive in the deep end and swim or try to swim. And then the flip side of that is that we had many candidates who were on the fence, who for one reason or another couldn't pass the EdTPA or the Foundation of Reading exam or one of the Praxis exams, and then they opened them up to a collection of evidence. So those people were allowed to get licensed. So it's this kind of, you want and you don't want,
Right.
Almost to see who's going to race to get to the end. And it's a challenge to the profession as a whole, I believe.
Well, that's helpful because there's both good and bad. And sometimes the regulatory environment protects us from less deep preparation of teachers, and sometimes it gets in our way. We kind of have to pick our battles. I was wondering, just to, before we leave this convening power, and I'm very impressed with the fact that now 4 states that have been identified in this conversation are all convening deans. The crisis here, on the one hand, it is healthcare and social welfare. On the other hand, it is race and the structural and systemic barriers created by our decisions of the past and our need for the future. If you could add strong voices to the convening of ed school deans who, in a way, you're in such a social environment, but we are still talking to ourselves in a way. I'm struck, Jason, by the fact that you brought your public health expert to the dean's table, because maybe we would get more attention to how significant our role is going forward if we brought, I'm interested, Nancy, more of our community college colleagues to the table, but also maybe healthcare professionals, mental health, other adjacent sectors. Might break the stranglehold of those are ed school deans, but not talking about the whole. Just trying to provoke a little out of the box. What do you think?
Well, Jason, and then let me.
You go ahead.
Okay, so one of the most interesting recommendations out of the Kerwin Commission was the idea of community schools, and it was really an attempt at changing the question about what is it that students need? What is it that our kids need? Mm-hmm. And especially in Baltimore City, which is really where, we have the greatest, in our face kind of challenges around equity and student access. What we came to was that community schools that have social workers, healthcare professionals, dentists, right, counselors, language for non-English speaking parents, language instruction, creating schools that would be that anchor in their community is something that's important and good. And there was a budget line for it, and assuming that we get any money back next year, there will be budget for it. But I think your question is in some ways, it's not just who do we bring to the table for our convenings, but who do we bring to the table to solve the problems of the schools? And we're part of, we can be part of the solution, teacher ed programs, but we can't be the whole solution.
Right.
And so I really like the idea of communities, it's an interesting model because it then opens up for more expertise to come and help solve the problem.
Well, and forever, Ira Harkavy has been the guru of community schools at the Penn Netter Center, still kicking, still active in this concept. And if not now, I mean, it's so highlighted in the context of COVID-19 and Black Lives Matter. Jason, you wanted to comment?
Yeah, just a couple examples of that, Nancy. I think when we did Teach New York, now 4 or 5 years ago, which was soon a system-wide convening on this, we had the unions at the table, we had elected officials at the table. We tried to bring them all in to be part of the solution. And taking a page out of that playbook, when we in the School of Education began focusing on diversifying the teacher education pipeline, we got some donors behind us who were able to fund a program to provide some resources and mentoring support for current students. But we realized we even had trouble recruiting current students into the teaching profession, right? We had resources there for mentoring, for scholarships. We said, we want you to come, we'll pay for part of your education. That by the time they get to college, they've already been turned off to it if they're not choosing to move that direction. And so we began working with our statewide union, NICED, to talk about changing the attitudes toward teaching. And we could have reached out to all the schools individually and talked to them about this, but when we paired with NICED on this Take a Look at Teaching initiative, right, they got to their members and said, this is a really important thing for us collectively to be focusing on. And it can't just be us in education, it needs to be the community-based organizations. So we worked with the union worked with the teachers identified community-based organizations, religious groups, nonprofits, local, fraternal organizations that could reach out to minority groups more specifically to encourage them to think about teaching. And so we've now created this network, collective impact, right, in the capital region of all sorts of entities that are collectively working together to try to encourage poor people from diverse backgrounds to consider teaching at the 5th and 6th grade level. It's a long-term effort, right? But it was something we could have done on our own. We had to bring other people to the table to move that forward. I would say the other, Nancy, to pick up on the expertise of the university, school safety, security has become a real issue lately. And schools that have not focused on that a great deal, at least not at the level that we probably should be. And so we have a College of Emergency Preparedness, Homeland Security, Cybersecurity, it's a mouthful, here at UAlbany, as well as School of Public Health. Last year, we launched a new institute called the School Safety and Security Institute, which is open to everybody. But because it was with, I think, our colleagues in Homeland Security and our colleagues in Public Health, we got local officials, we got the statewide comptroller, we were able to draw a lot more attention to this issue and about how we could collectively try to navigate the space because we had the various perspectives to bear on this. So I think, to your point, great examples of just bringing people together at the table around, we all care about education, and you convince people of that piece, and they're willing to get around the table and have a conversation and move things forward.
So you remind me that in planning this webinar, we tapped the expertise of that group within NASH, taking student success to scale, the TS3 leaders, and we talk regularly with the provosts of the systems and chief academic officers. And some had suggested, we really need to sit down with the chief state school officers to make partnerships less of a could you please help us to more of a norm, more a part of the mutuality of responsibility. We've talked about the teachers unions or professional association, the AFT, the NEA. We know that other social contexts are affected. So the question is there anything NASH should be doing of a convening nature to lift this conversation to a national dialogue at just the moment when we know the demography of teachers does not match the demography of our schools, that community college is going to be a part of the free college conversation, and that's where a lot of our pipeline lies. The need for more professional opportunities for university and teachers to share. I'm wondering, just from our colleagues or anybody else who would want to turn their mic on to say, yeah, I wish we could get some kind of national dialogue. Let me know. Let's hear it. Yay? Nay?
Well, we have at least a couple of yeses showing up at the chat box.
I do think that it would be a great idea for NASH to be taking on a lead role in this national conversation. We need to be changing the conversation around the teaching profession in general. There is a reason why in Texas, over 50% of our teachers come from non-university affiliated alternative certification programs. So the first time they're in a classroom with students is when they're the teacher of record. 50% of our teachers, and part of that has to do with the fact that ed prep programs are undervalued. I hear it frequently. Well, why, if people are trying to switch careers and they don't want to have to go through all the clinical field work that's not paid for, then they're going to go and do this alt cert for $3,000 and then immediately get into a job and have that taken out of their wages. They put $300 up front. So we need to be changing that conversation. And then I also think we need to be talking about ways that we might modify our model.
Well, all of that could be precipitated by some kind of national conversation, but true to our form, we thought we better ask you first. We thought we better see how this dialogue goes, But I'm impressed with the fact that we're hearing that you are conveners. You do see systems as conveners, and that we might be able to consider taking this to the next level. Rebecca, you watching the chat? What's happening?
I am. I'm just seeing, echoing this as well. Shonda says we need our partners in on this conversation. US Prep, Branch Alliance, Raise Your Hand Texas, etc.
I saw you, Jill.
Yeah, Sherry Harwell saying we also need to talk about affordability.
Absolutely.
Right.
That's a big issue. And, just a lot of support for the idea of raising the conversation up a level. So.
And I guess I would say one other thing, that NASH is a higher ed association, and we don't want to put in place the same dynamic that is perceived by the K-12 schools all the time,
Right,
which is
right.
we're going to invite you to our convening, and noblesse oblige. But
Yeah.
the CSSO group is a very, very powerful, and some kind of collaborative convening strikes me as the best model.
Right.
Totally agree. And when they are at the table, the NEA, AFT feel like they need a balance. Well, we know all this. We just have to do it the right way. But maybe this is the moment. I think you started us down that pathway, Nicole. Thank you. This is the moment. And we do want to come out of this with changes that we know need to be made, that we have seen in an emergency and in a crisis, and the increased sensitivity around Black Lives Matter. So I want to personally thank Jason and Nicole and Nancy and all of you who dialed us in today. We're just really warmed by your interest and your commitment. And with that, I will turn it back to Rebecca.
Well, I just want to add my thanks. I mean, I think I always learn so much from all of you, and I'm always impressed by how many of you come to be part of this conversation, whether you speak or not. We know that you are important parts of the community. We really, really appreciate all of the great work you're doing on your campuses and your systems on behalf of all of our students from K-12 through college. This is such an important time, and such an important time, I think, for education. We need to make sure that we keep our eye on that and don't lose the core of what it is that we're about. So we hope that you will join us in our next webinar. We don't have it quite framed up yet, but you can look for us coming back probably sometime in early September. Good luck with all of your plans as they come into focus for the fall. We know that they're changing hour by hour almost now, and there are a lot of challenges for all of us. So thank you all again. And we hope to see you soon. Stay safe, stay healthy. Find some time to take for yourself and renew a little bit before we hit the ground running for the fall. Okay, thanks a lot, everybody. Take care.
Thank you so much.